Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode 147 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I have two great distinguished guests this morning. I have Don Debar. He's a longtime broadcaster, and he is streaming from New York. And he told me what city, and I've already forgot what city, but I know it's in New York. Austin. Oh, there we go. I would have not spelled it correctly. Austining. Thank you, Don, for joining us very much. And then I got Chris Black, international law expert from Campbellford, Ontario, I believe.
Right.
And it is it noon at both of your locations? Is it noon now?
Yeah, Don and I are not too far apart, really. Geographically, it's noon. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Because I always say good morning, and then I realize it's not morning for anybody but me. But thank you both for joining me. We have a show today entitled "Trump Drops Peace Pretense," and that is a reference to Trump's recent frustration that he had expressed towards Vladimir Putin, because Vladimir is going crazy. Trump just wants peace, right? Trump is a man of peace. Vladimir is going crazy, bombing people, and it's like, come on, we need peace. But what happened is Germany announced on behalf of the United States that the United States is no longer going to limit itself to, a certain distance with its ballistic missiles that it gives to Ukraine to use. So it's just kind of a bizarre, a bizarre communication of this change in strategy, where Germany is announcing on behalf of the United States that neither England, Britain, France, or the United States is going to limit the range of the missiles that they give to Ukraine. And I wanted to talk generally about the the strategy that's being pursued here. And I want to give credit to Brian Berletic, for what I'm going to attempt to put forth here. What's really going on. So Hegseth was in Europe not too long ago, and he delivered a speech. And there's two kind of principles that we want to keep in mind. The first one is the division of labor. And so Hegseth talked about the division of labor with the Europeans, and how, the United States needs to pivot to China, and Europe needs to pick up the slack with regards to the conflict in Ukraine. So division of labor is one term, and what is it? Strategic sequencing. So what we have here is a think tank paper that kind of was lifted verbatim in that Hegseth speech. Some of the sentences that he was saying were lifted verbatim from this policy paper. But let's just read really quick. So it says the United States faces a growing risk of multi-front war against Russia, China, and Iran. The optimal response to this danger would be a sequential strategy aimed at inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia in Ukraine on a faster timeline than China is prepared to move against Taiwan. Well, that's interesting. But for that strategy to work, the United States must use the current window wisely to shore up the situation in Eastern Europe, broker a more effective division of labor with allies in Europe and the Indo-Pacific, and reform the U.S. defense industrial base. So basically, I mean, does it sound like they're pursuing peace? Does this sound like they're going after global peace? It really doesn't. So we're gonna increase our defense industrial base. Europe is going to have to also do the same, which is what Hegseth told the Europeans to do. Instead of 2% on defense, start spending 5% of your GDP on defense. And then also our neighbors in the Indo-Pacific. So the Philippines, Japan, South Korea. So, I think, there's a little bit of a debate about, what is going on. And there's a debate about what Trump represents. And is he serious, fighting the establishment and holding the United States back from, getting into a war, getting into wars? Because he definitely, what's the word? Campaigned, right? He campaigned on peace. And so a lot of people, want to believe that he is serious about navigating these times and securing peace and keeping the warmongers at bay. But I don't know. That's difficult for me to believe. But I guess that maybe that's where I will let you guys get a word in edgewise. You guys have any thoughts, or let me move this. Any thoughts, or I'm sure you do, on what I just said. And I don't even know who I'm going to put on the spot. Don, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Lucky me. Thank you.
Sorry, Don.
That's right. I started the day today, actually, when I got out of bed and turned the TV on in the living room. The meeting of NATO that was closing in Dayton, it had taken place over the last few days. And listening to, I don't even know the guy's name, from the Netherlands off the top of my head. The new guy.
Rutte.
Yeah, Rutte, yeah. Listening to him prattle about, the same thing you were just saying. The way to peace is to, keep loading up on weapons and personnel and wherewithal to conduct war. What does Trump intend, and what is possible to do? And how does that relate to campaign promises? And, by the way, collaterally, while we're talking about defending democracy and all, how does that relate to what the people of Europe and the United States and the rest of the world actually want to see as output from, whatever the hell they do? Again, at NATO, a number of them were coming up with strategies basically to sell to their populations, their reluctant populations, the need to increase weaponry and to take a harder and harder stand against Russia, the big threat, and acknowledging that that's not where the center of political gravity is among their own constituents, that the task for them in dealing with their constituents wasn't to learn what they want and deliver it, but rather to convince them of the need for war, which to me does not sound like defending democracy at all. So Trump's role as a politician running, for office, both in terms of his own intent and then in terms of walking into governing an apparatus with a legislature that has the track record of, for example, the 2017 legislation, when Trump had suggested perhaps we could start rolling back some of the sanctions against DPRK and ultimately maybe Russia and Iran too, with 417 to 3 or 517 to 3 or something vote between the two houses, some ridiculously lopsided, near unanimous vote in both the Senate and the House, the Senate 98-2, if I remember correctly, imposing additional sanctions, and saying not only can you not unilaterally remove any of these, but by the way, here's some more. Leaving him at that moment, when he was under attack from 5 corners, in the position of either, vetoing it and being overridden 500-1 or whatever, or signing it and adding a signing statement and saying, don't worry, I got this. I don't know politically what kind of choices he has for getting what he intends. And so I don't know how relevant all of that is. With the discussion about the American politicians and what they're doing is interesting, I guess, for entertainment value. But I don't think that pressuring anybody at this point is going to actualize in policy anywhere. I think that it's going to require something larger than engaging in like electoral political struggle at this point in time. This system has proven itself intransigent against political struggle. So I don't know what venues this will be played in. And so the 2 words that I would use to describe it would be weir, and the second one rhymes with duck and in the past tense. and I wouldn't
You're
start
trying
out
to say
with any
we're
more
fucked.
detail than
I
that.
think you're trying to say we're fucked.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, that was
Chris, are we fucked?
it.
Well, yeah, I just rewrote an essay I wrote back in 2015. I rewrote it and got it published in New Eastern Outlook. Fascism, Our Common Enemy, and you can find it on New Eastern Outlook. It's on Facebook. But my last line in that was a quote from Bertolt Brecht, in which he said that Mac the knife is back in town, and his knife is colored red. And that's what we're facing. Fascism in all sorts of guises, but fascism. And I watched briefly yesterday, I just chanced on the video of Kristi Noem talking to Congress about habeas corpus, meaning that her understanding of that was that that allowed the American government to arrest anybody, when it's the exact opposite. So when you have a cabinet which is made up of people who are so stupid or ignorant, or deliberately stupid, I don't know, but to choose people like that, and for Trump to claim that he's for peace when he's aiding and abetting genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza, attacked the Houthis in Yemen for defending the Palestinians, and then seems to be defeated by that because he's totally withdrawn the forces from action against the Houthis, although the Houthis are still launching missiles at Israel. He looks weak and vacillating, and I'm glad he's stopped the attack on the Houthis, by the way. But I think his campaign pledge to bring peace in 24 hours was based on false ideas or illusions he has about Russia and the war that was going on. I don't think that guy is very bright. It seems to me from his negotiations with Witkoff and President Putin and so on with Iran that he has a misunderstanding of the way the world works. And he thought peace to him was a ceasefire. Because if he had really been interested in peace, he would have sent Witkoff to Moscow and said, we hear your demands, why you started the war, and we're willing to talk about all those issues on a fundamental basis, a restructuring of the security, European security architecture, the world security architecture, maybe rolling back NATO, all the demands, we should talk about these things. And he could have ordered the war to stop immediately if he really wanted to, but he hasn't. And the Russians, when they meet, have told him again and again, these are our demands, or these are our conditions. If you agree to talk to them, we're willing to talk to you. But they walk back. They don't want to talk about those issues because Trump the American government has put itself into a situation where it is boxed in because it wants to rule the world and it wants to bring down Russia and China. And so it cannot agree to step back and withdraw from Europe and from the world in the way that Russia and China would like them to do. So they're not going to do it. They're going to do the exact opposite, as Don has so well expressed, and the speech at West Point was an example of that. A very rambling speech, by the way. He looked like he was not quite there either. So I think, and with Merz saying that Europe, France, and Britain, and the United States have lifted any limitations on use of their long-range cruise missiles and so on, it's an act of war. It's a statement of declaration of war, illegal terms. And so the United States, and then Trump's insults, the continual insults of President Putin, though he says he's his best buddy, he tends to say that about people he wants to crush. If you watch the Netflix documentary about him, it's only 4 episodes, but it's quite good. But he has a history of doing that. That's just part of his personality. If he doesn't like you, he'll smooth you over and say, I love you, buddy. Then he'll crush you tomorrow. And all the time in the back of his mind, he's got a plan to crush you while he's saying, I love you. This is him. So I don't take any of that for what it's face value. Deep behind him, he has a group of people who still want to crush Russia, but they wanted a ceasefire so the Europeans and the Ukrainians could rearm, and the United States can rearm. And now he's got this Golden Dome fantasy, which will never be built, I don't think. but it's still a threat. I mean, it states an aggressive intent. It's an aggressive statement to the world. The United States still wants to dominate the world.
Yeah.
So you have a series of acts of aggression really being expressed, and then with Merz saying this, and Trump not saying anything against what Merz just said, and calling Putin crazy. I mean, how does he think President Putin's going to want to meet with him in Moscow on some summit meeting when he's insulting him like that? It's not going to happen. Now, I don't think there's going to be any peace treaty. I think the war is going to go on, and we risk, as Don said, being fucked because it's going to escalate from here on in. And Hegseth's speech. Why does anybody ask why, Mr. Hegseth? Why are Russia, China, and Iran a threat to the United States? They're not. You're the threat to them. And why are you a threat to them? Why are you keep acting as a threat to all these countries? Why? What's your real purpose? They don't say. Of course, it's all about magic words of democracy and values and all this nonsense. So I think we're fucked. Yeah.
Okay, two, we're fucked, and Bill, no. So one thing that really is unsettling is the announcement of this, gloves off in terms of how deep, whatever distance that they can fire missiles into Russia, whatever. That comes like within hours or a day or so of the announcement. I saw, in fact, in RT or Sputnik or one of the Russian news outlets that one of the drone attacks appeared to be targeted against President Putin while he was flying from somewhere to another. I don't know, with a helicopter or a small plane or something. So
I mean, it's not clear whether that was accident. He just happened to fly through a drone swarm and was just heading towards Moscow, or they tried to assassinate him.
Understood.
But the Russians can view that as an attempted assassination, and I think they're viewing it that way. When he was flying from Moscow to Kursk,
especially if they accidentally do assassinate him,
accidentally.
Okay. And also the there's the history there. I mean, we're lucky we survived that. There was the attempted hit on the Kremlin 2 years ago now or something, when they sent a drone swarm or something that got through and hit the roof of one of the buildings there or whatever. Every escalation carries with it this added risk, and I don't know how to read myself what comes out of Trump's mouth on a daily basis. I don't know how the Russian government, how intelligence, how President Putin, how anyone there reads it also, or the rest of our politicians, yes, but I don't know. But I do know there's the action speaks, if not louder than words, at least as loud as words. And firing into their country really means putting Moscow and St. Petersburg and some of the other cities in range for attacks, and not just drone attacks, but actual missile attack where you take out a block, or an industrial property, or civilian casualties in the dozens or more, or electrical or water or sewer infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, with the purpose of the hit isn't just to cause some sort of psychological trauma to the population, or to provide some sort of psychological benefit to your own population that you're not completely impotent, but where it's rather to actually inflict damage. In other words, will Russia actually suffer damage and not strike back beyond Ukraine? And it seems like that is the question that they want to ask now by inflicting damage or threatening to inflict damage. That's what they're doing right now.
Allegedly, this morning, there was a big security meeting in the Kremlin. It was with DPRK, Iran, Russia, and one other country that escapes me right now. But I think it's, in response to these latest escalations. And definitely, it seems that, before the show, me and Don were discussing that, we're all just speculating, like we're at the very beginning of this conflagration. But we can see that a conflagration is on the horizon and it's taking shape. And the question is, there's a lot of questions. Like there's three conflicts: Iran, China, and Russia. And the question is, what does the United States think is the optimal way to sequence these, three different, theaters? And it seemed clear that the United States was really hoping they could, sweet talk Putin into another trap, like a Minsk III trap, where they would, freeze the conflict, get in peacekeepers under a non-NATO umbrella, and then really just, move on and give Europe time to get their defense industry going so that they could unfreeze it, in a few years when they're in a better position. But Putin is obviously not stupid, and he's not going to agree to that. And so now it begs the question, well, what is the United States think is their best hand to play? Like, it seems like we're trying to tell Israel, don't mess with Iran because we need to pivot. We need to, at least have a frozen conflict with Iran and, focus on, China and Russia if we have to. Also, it seems obvious that we're going to get, we want the EU to pick up the slack with regards to Russia. And again, we really want to move against China on as quickly as possible using, our proxies there, especially in the Philippines. But I mean, what is the winning hand? Like, does the West think they can do? What would they like to see happen? I mean, it's obvious they wanted a ceasefire in Ukraine, and they're not going to get that. So is Israel going to give them, a freezing of the Iran conflict, or is Israel going to push the issue there? And then how quickly are we going to start, escalating things in against China? I heard also this morning 500 U.S. service people in Taiwan. There's, 500 U.S. service people. It was 0 for a while. Biden moved it up to like 47, and now it's 500. That's just a huge provocation itself. Mm-hmm. That's Chinese territory. Imagine, China has some military people in Hawaii. Like, it's the same thing.
I heard 500 a couple of years ago, so I wouldn't be too pissed.
That's true. No, that's a good point.
Well, I'm worried about what their plan is, since they can't get a ceasefire, which would have still kept Russia engaged and weak as they go after China. And the reason they want to remove Russia is to, steal its resources, but also it protects China.
Right.
They failed at that, but even with the ceasefire, it would keep a lot of forces, Russian resources focused on that area, not on China. Since that's failed, what can they do? Since they don't have the conventional forces to counter Russia, I fear they're going to give Ukraine nuclear weapons. And why do I say that? Because in the trade, the minerals deal, so-called, they signed a couple of weeks ago, there's a clause in there. They have a series of whereas clauses, whereas Ukraine is this and whereas Ukraine is that. And there's one which says, whereas the United States thanks the Ukraine for getting rid of its nuclear weapons voluntarily, which is a lie because it didn't. Ukraine was forced to give up nuclear weapons in 1993-4. By Russia and the United States. I think the United States didn't want a nuclear-armed Ukraine. They couldn't control it. So they insisted on it. And those weapons were sent to Russia and were dismantled. And then I think Ukraine got some money for the uranium content or something. Anyway, there's now a clause in the mineral deal celebrating the voluntary relinquishment of nuclear weapons by Ukraine. Why is that in a minerals deal? Why is that even mentioned? It implied to me, if you read the subtext, that therefore, since Ukraine was not forced to give them up, but they voluntarily let go of them, they could voluntarily reacquire them.
Yeah, they're recharacterizing it,
And I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah,
I think they may give them battlefield tactical and then trying to just really cause some major damage to the Russian forces and then hope that the Russians don't retaliate. But of course they will. But this is, I think they're I mean, that's what I'm saying. This is why it's so dangerous. Like Trump, I don't think has got it all together in his head any more than Biden does. Because he doesn't seem compos mentis. When I watched the West Point speech, he rambled on about all sorts of strange things. It was weird. And watching Kristi Noem's doesn't even know basic U.S. constitutional law, common law for 1,000 years. We're dealing with a government which is mentally deficient and capable of making grave mistakes, which can kill us all. And I think with Lindsey Graham, I mean, people forcing through this bill, and I don't see Trump speaking against this bill to sanction 500% tariffs on any country that buys oil from Russia, which means India, China. I mean, how is that going to work? This is the declaration of war on the world, really. And that will be used to what they call the shadow fleet. It's not a shadow fleet; it's an open fleet. They're going to start trying to seize, as they did last week, or the Estonians tried to seize a Russian tanker until the Russian Air Force threatened to sink their ships, and they had to let it go. I think there's going to be more actions like that, where they're going to try and seize Russian ships in the Baltic, and there's going to be NATO ships sunk, and things are going to explode. So I'm not optimistic. I mean, I hope reason rules somehow, but I don't see it happening. Not in the United States government or in London. And yes, I think Don's right, and you're right that Russia is quite capable of striking targets in England and Germany and sending a message. They could quite clearly hit some military targets in Britain because they really are really angry with the British. The British are just doing even worse than the United States in many ways. Germany, and what Mert said yesterday was just, in light of the Second World War and his family's history, I mean, connected to the SS. I mean, it's just terrible what's going on. And I would, if Russia struck the American bases in Germany or on a German base tomorrow, I would not be surprised. And said, that's a warning to you, what's going to come if you keep sending Taurus missiles against us. We're going to do more of this. And what are you going to do about it?
It's interesting. I mean, I would guess that if they start hitting targets deep inside Russia with these Western supplied missiles, that they might just start decapitating the Ukrainian government, is what I was thinking. But it's a decision, and I'm glad I have total faith in the Russian government to do the correct thing and to respond appropriately. Like, as a layperson, like I'm not sure what that is. It seems like just attacking Britain directly seems a little excessive, but if that's what Russia does, like I would definitely support whatever their response is. Yeah, what the West is doing is just unconscionable, and it's pushing us all to the threat of World War III and nuclear winter. So
well, don't forget,
but yeah, how do you deal with it?
I think they're quite capable of striking. Look what the United States did in Yugoslavia. They bombed with 5 cruise missiles the Chinese embassy.
Yeah.
So I don't think the Russians have any compunctions about striking something in Britain or Germany if it comes to that. And what Mert said yesterday is pushing that line real hard.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like it was designed to do that, which is,
yes,
if they're trying to provoke something, and if that failed, what will they do next to provoke something?
Yeah,
and as they go up that ladder,
go ahead.
As they go up that ladder, the response, it seems appropriate already that Russia would fire something into one of those, either into Poland or Bulgaria or somewhere where this material's coming in, or at least at the road at the border of those countries, and yet they're not doing that yet. They're keeping a very measured level of response to that stuff, and so our response is to keep cranking it up. It's insane, really. It's insane.
So one of my most recent Facebook posts was, focusing on another hot spot that there's talk that could be the next big escalation by the West. So, which is basically, it sounds like there's pressure on Maya Sandu in Moldova to, militarily try and take back Transnistria in a very similar way that Georgia tried to took, South Ossetia back in 2008. So that would obviously give, Russia some trouble because they don't have a direct link to Transnistria to support Transnistria. But see, Maya Sandu, she stole that election. Like, she shouldn't have won that election. They stole it, gave it to her because they didn't want a pro-Russian person winning, just like in Romania, just like in
Ukraine.
France.
Yeah, Ukraine.
Same
removed
thing.
him at gunpoint practically.
So is that, so I don't know. That's just another area that the United States or the West in general could, escalate the situation. Which it obviously would. And then, and they need to escalate the situation, right? Because they need to convince the European people that there is a serious threat and they need to give up their social safety net and they need to invest more in weapons. Like, this is a big part of the agenda here, that as we, get more and more onto a war footing, we have to justify, taking all this butter and putting it at bread and butter and spinning it on guns and bullets. So,
yeah, they're gonna try and attack Russia from all sorts of angles. Moldova, the Caucasus, the Crocus attack. The Crocus attack still is causing a lot of anger. It has. It's not that long ago, a few months back, when they did that, back in March last year.
The nightclub.
Yeah, well, it was a concert hall. Then several hundred Russian youth were burned to death by those terrorists who were acting, no doubt, for NATO or the Ukrainian government, whatever. And Russians haven't forgotten that, and they know who is behind it, as they know who is behind the Caucasus War and the Beslan school when they killed 500 children there wearing NATO uniforms. They haven't forgotten these things. Russia, Putin is an exceptionally reasonable man, as Don's a very measured and intelligent man who was trying to keep the conflict as low as possible, considering the circumstances. And he wants peace, but they keep egging him on. And there's a lot of people in Russia who want much stronger measures taken than what he's willing to do at this point. But now he's declared that there's going to be a buffer zone. And yesterday, I think, was it yesterday or the day before, Medvedev said the way things are going, the buffer zone is going to be most of Ukraine.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's where they're going. And I think they've announced that, really. And Putin didn't dismiss Medvedev's statement at all.
Right. Not at all.
But what's going on with the American Congress? I don't understand. If Trump wanted peace, why has he not spoken out publicly against this bill passing through the Congress for more sanctions? He hasn't gone up and made a big speech to Congress. You can't do this. It's going to cause more war. Well, he hasn't said, in spite of what you're doing, I'm going to pull out everybody right now. If you want to override me and get another president, go ahead. But I'm doing this now. He's not doing it.
Well, what would the outcome of that be? You're playing for big stakes at this point, Right, symbology is nice, but it's not. It might not be maybe. I don't know what other things can be done. So there is that problem, but maybe they see something that can be done. I don't know. Getting turned out, it's almost as bad as presiding over the World War III. But I think it's just shy. It's at least shy of it. Trying to hang in long enough to find something to do. I don't know what it is that can be done to stop them. But in terms of dealing with another sanctions bill in the Congress, we already know what the outcome of that's going to be. I'm certain they know what it is because we've already seen this. And it's almost at the same stage, as a matter of fact. It was in May and June of 2017. They went. They could track the history of the bill in the congressional website, and then they get it, and then what happens? I don't know. Somehow the problems we have are we don't know what he wants to do, and the indications are that he's full of shit. I guess if he say fuck, I can say he's full of shit, right?
Yeah.
So, and so but assuming that he has some need to continue to be president, and he's under attack from almost every other quarter, perhaps people that want to stop a war could find some way to pressure him to try to deliver on that promise. I don't know what mechanism that would be, and I don't know if getting him to if you could get him to respond to it, and then assuming that you could, and assuming even you could infuse some enthusiasm into it, now you're up against everybody else, Congress, the people that he put in place at the Pentagon and state and wherever the frig else they've got, actors, people that are going to decide when and where this war takes place. And then you've got somehow to try to negotiate your way to an understanding with President Putin, with Russia and China and whomever else, actually believing that you have some control over the beast that they're facing. And that was one of the things, when you look at 13 days, I keep picking through that because it came from Bobby Kennedy's perspective at that time in 1962, that the one of the concerns that they had was whether or not Khrushchev could actually speak for the Soviet government at the time, or if there were people, behind him, around him, whatever, that were going to act regardless of what he said or did. And of course, that carries with it, obviously, the fact that this is a situation that they didn't imagine out of thin air, but rather was part of their own experience with the government they themselves were at the head of. And they discuss that and illustrate that too in both the book and the dramatization in the movie and in the record, by the way. So we've got problems with Trump. Most of the world thinks he's a clown. The part that doesn't thinks he's the biggest evil since Satan, and the only people that he really has to answer to, I guess, are the people that voted him in, which, by the way, happens to be tens of millions of people. Somewhere there's got to be some place to farm some instrument to make him move and let us see where the real dispute. That's the problem. If he really is trying to reach some sort of a new arrangement in international affairs, if it's a multipolar world is going to be acknowledged, not just to work through a couple meetings and then go back to hegemony, but actually acknowledged as a reality, show us where the fracture is, not by just saying these people are full of shit, they're fake news or whatever. They do that for you. Show us who is on your side and who is on their side, and bring this to the public discussion in a way where I think if people saw this going on in the open, they would be lining up to help in one way or another to compel the outcome that we need. I don't know. I mean, I think it's kind of unprecedented with societies the size of ours, where you would have sort of a self-motivated population trying to force the government towards a particular policy or movement. But I think we kind of have to figure out how to do that, because I don't know what the fuck else to do.
Billy addressed that. I'm up north here, so I got no answer to that.
I'm just reminded, I was watching, I think Caleb Maupin was on, what's that guy's name? Garland Nixon. And maybe he was somewhere else, but he mentioned that it was the policy. It was a dedicated policy of the ruling establishment to make sure that you obfuscate reality and keep the people from seeing things in a black and white perspective.
Yeah.
Because once they see things in a black and white perspective, they're going to take a side, and you're going to, the majority is going to win. And so it's an intrinsic necessity for them to obfuscate things and just make it, appear like nobody, we're not sure who's on what side. We're not sure what's going on, and that just benefits their interests so much.
The fundamental. I'm sorry. I'm just going to that. The fundamental. I say this from time to time when I'm trying to illustrate a point, sort of around this kind of an issue. But the fundamental thing in the old days, there was the king. He's in a castle. They sent guys out. They took some of your shit. If they left you enough to be content, okay, fine. If they didn't, everybody gathered up, went to the castle. They knew where it was. They knew the king was inside. They dragged his ass out. They strung him up, or they cut him into little pieces, or did whatever, and they got some peace for a while. We have no idea who it is, or where they live, or what levers of power, who has what hands on, and so much of it is so diffuse and through the bureaucracy and other mechanisms that so it has to be virtual by its nature almost. Our contact with it has to be virtual. It's not that hands-on. So how do you operate from this? I really don't know. We've seen civil rights movement, anti-war movements, color revolutions, the things that we've seen in the, say, 18th, 19th, and 20th century and early 21st century. But the kind of thing we're talking about is the kind of thing I'm envisioning is necessary. I have no idea what to model it off of. I don't know who to organize, where, how, what.
Right. Yeah, because in the Vietnam War, you had a lot of opposition because people didn't want to be drafted and go to that war. So that was part of the foundation of that movement, which is very active, of course, then. But that you don't have the mass conscription now in the United States or in Canada or England, or so most people aren't touched by it directly. But we get the same contradictions in Canada here. Okay, when I spoke to you when we started, King Charles gave his throne speech in Ottawa today, or was just finishing when I came here. And why is he there? Well, because he is the head of state, but he came this time to show the Americans that Canada is not the United States and never will be. Yet, despite Trump's threats against Canada and Canada's strong reaction, the Canadian government is still holus bolus diving deeper into the Ukraine-Russia war and anti-Chinese rhetoric. It's just bizarre because it's so locked in to this thinking, even though they're being attacked by the country that started this war, or threatened to be attacked by them, and they're reacting against them. Instead of abandoning the policies they were forced to engage in because of the American alliance with Canada, they're now saying we don't want to be with the United States like that anymore, but we're going to continue these wars the United States started because why? Nobody understands why. They don't explain why, and yet just REA Novosti reported 35 Canadian and British soldiers were killed and several captured in Zaporizhia just a few days ago.
Right. It's the British too, in other words.
Yeah.
Canada's going along with as they.
That's right.
And you have the Ukrainian diaspora there too. That's somewhat influential, right?
Well, yeah, but it's a split. You don't hear there's two aspects to the Ukrainian. There's a large Ukrainian diaspora here. Most of them came over before the First World War. And then had the unfortunate experience in the First World War being thrown into concentration camps in Canada. And after the Second World War, after the First World War, then between the 30s and the 40s, a lot of Ukrainians came in. Most of the Ukrainians that came in then were heavily pro-Soviet. So the Ukrainian community is split between those who were pro-Nazi and those who were pro-communist.
Wow.
You only hear about the Ukrainian Canadian Association, which is heavily Nazified, Christian feelings from that group, and that's all you hear about. But there's another group of Ukrainians which has this very similar name, which are quite pro-Russia and against the NATO war against Russia. And they have very left sympathies, but you don't hear about them too much.
Well, thank you for that.
So
yeah, but so anyway, the larger picture being, of course, that Britain is. That's the same thing about Britain. Why?
Yeah.
Or Europe, the place where the first battles will take place. But I think
Yeah, Britain is bankrupt. I mean, Britain hasn't really got an army left, and it's about as small as Canada's is now. And yet Britain, I think my son asked me this: why is Britain? Because we're British by background and birth. Why is Britain going after Russia? What's the point? Because Britain has nothing. It's got 60 million people or more now, can't feed more than 3 or 4 by itself, relies on imports for everything, has no resources. Its oil and gas fields are running out in the North Sea rapidly. They want what Russia has. And I'm sure there are secret treaties made between the United States and the European countries and Ukraine. There are secret treaties guaranteeing each country a portion of Russia.
Yeah.
Because you ask, why are they willing to absorb all this economic damage from the Nord Stream bombing and the high gas price and all this stuff and all the expenses of war? Why are they willing to suffer these losses? Because it's just losses right now. For what? Why are they doing this? There's got to be a rational reason. And I think there are secret treaties guaranteeing that France and Germany are guaranteed this section, Britain's guaranteed that, and the United States is. It's already been divided up, Russia. It's already been divided up on a map, and they've been told, this is
sure.
So they're hoping that they push this war, the ultimate benefit will be worth whatever the damage is in the meantime.
Yeah. They envision it like a cow on the wall of a butcher shop. Or something.
Right, exactly.
There's that group, the Helsinki group, the Collective Security, whatever the hell it's called, the CSCE here, that has as their objective, the decolonizing of Russia, quote unquote, and leaving somewhere between 12 and 15 independent countries, which sounds like they're parceling it up exactly like you described.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they want to do.
Liberals look at, Canada's decision and they're confused. It's like, why are they continuing this war against, Russia on behalf of the United States, and when the United States, is threatening them and all that kind of stuff. But, for the liberal perspective, right, it's like the West is united with their shared values. We respect human rights, we respect freedom, and that's what, combines us and unifies us against these authoritarian, human rights abusing, aggressive societies like China, like Russia. And so, but then they get confused, right? Because they start seeing, the genocide that the U.S. is enabling in Gaza. They probably can see through some of the lies and propaganda, vis-a-vis Russia and China, and they realize, well, I guess it is the United States that's ringing China with military bases and not the other way around. And so, they start to get confused, and they don't understand. Well, we're a sovereign state, Canada being a sovereign state. Like, why are we engaging in this thing? But as socialists, we understand that there's a ruling class, and the ruling class, is the ownership class. It's the wealthy elites. It's the ownership class, and they're united on their interests, and their interests aren't fucking about freedom, right? They're not interested in freedom. They're not interested in promoting human rights. Like, these are just liberal lies that are a facade and that obfuscate and hide the reality of oligarchy and dictatorship, which is exactly what the West has. And so, I'm not surprised that Canada's behaving like that, and I'm not surprised that Trump is treating Canada like the vassal that they are, like the slave that they are, because Canada doesn't call the fucking shots. It's the United States. It's Washington, D.C. And if Canada has resources that the United States needs to prosecute a global war to maintain the hegemony of the Western ruling establishment, they're going to fucking take it. And guess what? Canada's going to fucking give it to them, because that's, it's in their interest to give it to them.
They won't do that. Canada will never give that. They'll have a lot of dead bodies, I'll tell you that.
What I'm talking about is, and again, Trump has said we rule out military aggression against Canada, but we don't rule it out against Greenland. And I'm certain that Canada will negotiate a very sweet deal for whatever Western military industrial complex needs access to, whatever resources that will happen without any bloodshed.
I agree with that, but I don't know why the United States, because they already get the oil and gas almost for
Yeah.
nothing. I mean, the American and British oil companies pay the royalty now in Alberta, and it's just about 3 or 4 or 5, 6%. It's almost not. It's always taken out of the ground for free. The same companies pay Norway 70% and happily pay it. And it used to be when in the 60s when I was a teenager, the royalty they were paying was 45, 50%. So with free trade, when Bush brought in the free trade in 1993, it destroyed this country. I mean, we just deindustrialized Canada at that point. All the primary industry left. So the deals are worked out that the United States oil companies take out oil and gas from us almost for nothing. I don't know what else why they would want to take us over. They get it all for free anyway.
Yeah. Is it access to the Arctic? I mean, what exactly is the need that Canada has?
The cooperation's been so good. I mean, there's like twins.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why Trump's making this threat, but it's really pissed off people here. I tell you, if they tried some military action, there would be a lot of trouble.
I think it's a shit show. I think it's a distract. No, I think it's intended as a shit show,
maybe,
and a distraction.
Yeah.
The
trouble is that why would he do that? I mean, why is he angering the entire population of his strongest ally? Why?
Well,
I mean, it doesn't make any rational sense.
No, not for that reason. There's some other reason. I mean, there's domestic political reasons. I don't know. But I do know that what you say is true. I mean, Canada is about. It's like, well, is Canada a colony of the United States or a colony of Britain? Oh, both, because Canada's a colony of Britain and Britain's a colony of the United States, or whatever. Yeah. In terms of the ownership, right? So, I didn't see any point to that other than for some political impact on the domestic audience, or perhaps it's cover for whatever he intends to do about strong arming Greenland. I mean, the geography betrays sort of closing the encirclement of Russia and China. Now, I don't know that hasn't already been accomplished. I mean, Denmark is part of NATO, yes. Canada's part of NATO, yes.
Right.
I mean, we've had the U.S. Air Force radar, NORAD, and all that shit in Canada since the 1950s, since they created it, maybe since the 40s. I don't know. And the only thing I could think of that would follow from acquiring a jurisdiction over Canada would be that some of the things that they get away with in Canada right now, they wouldn't be able to get away with under American law. In other words, I think it runs to the counter to the interests of the people who make these policies to incorporate Canada in, instead of treating it like an offshore haven in some ways. Why would you want to pay U.S. income tax on rent collected in Toronto, for example?
Yeah.
David Kay seems to agree. Military action doesn't make any sense. And again, I do think that Trump kind of ruled it out.
Well, we hope so. Just the feeling up here is very strong. So
yeah, it would be. It should be.
But going back to, just thinking about actions against China. I think we should maybe mention the arrest by the ICC of former President Duterte of Philippines by the ICC on a warrant, which I think is totally illegal, but I don't think they have any jurisdiction over the matter. But they removed a pro-Chinese man, a former president, from the political scene in the Philippines, and they're going to keep him on ice for a long time. Even though I understand he's running for mayor in I'm not sure, Manila or someplace, but he's trying to engage. And they stitched it up with a couple of Mossad lawyers. One used to work for the Israeli Defense Forces, and the other guy is a London barrister who was associated with the lawyers they tried to force on Milosevic. So I think he's screwed. But they removed him on an illegal warrant for baseless reasons, to remove him from power in the Philippines because he has pro-Chinese sympathies. So you're seeing a buildup of setting the scene for something going to happen against China. But when that will happen, I mean, I don't know about that either. But
Yeah. Yeah, Duterte won actually. It's not Manila, it was some other town. But he won about a week and a half ago.
oh, he won. Oh,
Yeah,
good for
yep,
him.
yep.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, I agree too. I mean, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, you go ahead, Don. You're my guest.
No, I agree. Look, I mean, look, it's all one of a whole, really. You know, global domination, is exhaustive, and so it's a matter of sequencing. We saw what they were doing. You know, I remember back. So you have in 2010, Cote d'Ivoire, and was it Sarkozy at the time or whoever the hell was the president of France take that, right? And then 2011 they go after Libya and Syria. There's pushback in Syria. They take Libya. They're going after Syria. They're fighting an uprising in Bahrain. And then by 2014 you have the coup in Ukraine. I'm sitting in Beijing, for example, looking across this. They're going for Russia, and they're coming here. I'm sitting in Moscow and looking out, and they're saying they're coming in here next. They're tracing it. You can follow on a goddamn map. Mm-hmm. And so China, of course, understands this, and we've looked for since the Chinese Revolution, despite whatever issues there were between those two countries, the Soviet Union and/or Russia. And China, Russia's provided a nuclear umbrella and a strategic, balance against the West for China. China the same, although there have been contradictions, of course, the tripartite diplomacy of Kissinger et al. But they know that, we saw when the U.S. imposed the heavy sanctions on Russia, trying to ostracize them from the global economy and to take down their economy, China signed immediately. I think it was announced, the policy was announced in March, and in April or early May, China signed the largest business deal in history up to that point with Russia to buy all the gas and oil that they could sell over the next 25 or 30, whatever the hell it was, years. They understand that their fates are linked that they're married at the hip.
And we have to bring in North Korea, the DPRK, because it was quite striking. The end of the victory parade in Moscow on May 9th, when Putin walks over and hugs the North Korean officer in command of the North Korean troops in Russia. Yeah. That was quite something. And I saw it as an attack on Putin by some left group saying he was a rabid anti-communist. I said, well, that's strange. Yeah. We just all watched him hugging a very communist soldier. Yeah. And sitting next to Xi Jinping, who's a very communist leader, and he hugged the head of the Vietnamese Communist Party, who was also in Moscow, and so on and so forth. And Lukashenko's,
they're not communists. Deng restored capitalism, and
no more than China did. I mean, even Lenin had that, the new economic program. There's nothing wrong with Trump capitalism, but as long
as the real world,
That's right, real world. Because when we look, when I was last on, and you're a guest of Li Zhao, is it Liu Zhao?
Yes,
Leo, reminded us that since Putin came to power, they renationalized many of the industries.
Yep, that's right.
It's still basically almost cheap housing, free housing. University education is almost free. Transportation is next to nothing. Healthcare is still free. It's still a mixed society, and I'm sure when they get together with Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping, they say to Comrade Vladimirovich, don't you regret going that way? You could have gone our way. And now you realize it, and you're coming back our way.
Yeah.
We have to, I think one thing that struck me was when the Russians and the North Koreans finally confirmed that North Korean troops were active in Kursk. I thought it was a major revelation, yet none of the talking heads on YouTube mentioned it. The judge, all these guys, none of them talked about it. Nima. It's just like they didn't want to talk about that. And it's always puzzled me why that was not like a big topic of conversation. And I still don't get, because it's still not raised, because what it means is that Russia demonstrated to the West that the entire Asian European bloc from Minsk all the way to Vladivostok and down into Pyongyang is one solid alliance. And we've got each other's back. And if you think otherwise, and we've got North Korea's back, everybody's got it, we got Iran's back. You try and take us on, you're going to take us all on. So, and yet there's no mention of it.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a major thing for them to confirm that, because I doubted that they were really there, except I thought there
me
was
too.
some observers there. There was always observers, watching war, how war works, because there's probably Indian observers there. But.
It creates an interesting complication for propaganda here also. Right now here, they're running, in essence, the complete integration of Iran's military with Russia's. They got some crap about Russia working closely with Iran, and Iran working in Ukraine and other military, almost like a complete integration. That's like yesterday and today here in the media. And as they broadcast, these guys is one big block of evil. What they're also doing is broadcasting the kernel of that, which is this one big block.
Right. Block, yeah.
It just seems in all these theaters that there's no winning hand for the West. They can't, they're not going to regime change Iran. If they try and bomb Iran, they're going to destroy, get Israel destroyed, destroy all the oil exports leaving the Middle East. That's going to crash the global economy. Now, maybe they want to crash the global economy because they think they can weaponize a crashed global economy against China and focus all the pain on China. But
I've been there. They ain't going to be able to do that. China doesn't need anybody right now. They make everything. They got plenty of food and every other damn thing that you need. And they got Russia, the giant gas station or whatever next door if they need fuel.
So I thought it was also interesting that, I thought it was also interesting at the Traore, the new leader of Burkina Faso, was treated with like hero status with Putin, and had a big meeting, and then there was quite close showing Russia's support, and he's a Marxist also, by the way.
Yes, he is.
It was very cordial relations with him and Putin. But in the meantime, Trump is insulting the president of South Africa. I mean, if I had been the president of South Africa, I would have walked out of that, because he went there and was humiliated. Or they tried to humiliate him. He didn't succeed because that guy had some dignity and kept his dignity. But Trump pulled up and tried to humiliate him in front of the world, with accusing him of genocide against white farmers. I mean, come on.
Let me say something about that. I mean, so no, that's definitely true. Everything you say is true. They tried to humiliate this guy, but this guy is a big sellout. He is a big pro-Western sellout.
So it doesn't matter, though.
So he's the last person that Trump ought to be humiliating. It's not like it's a Traore kind of person. I mean, this guy's a milquetoast, elite, and he's totally pro-West.
Well, I'm not sure totally pro-West, but he is. I agree with you. He's not what I would hope the ANC would have produced as a leader. I would like Thabo Mbeki would be back, but there's a leader. But I agree with you, Billy. Why would he humiliate him? But if they want, like, South Africa has uranium, it has all these resources. It's a huge country, and it's an important country, a very important country in South Africa. Although it has the Communist Party there is still very strong, but still, nevertheless, you're right. So why did Trump do that? Do they want to control Africa, or they want to just insult everybody? And I mean, it's just the thinking.
I was saying that I realized that probably a lot of the impetus was probably what South Africa was doing vis-a-vis Israel and taking a real hard stand against the genocide. That's in retrospect,
some pressure probably came from there. I think some pressure probably came from there. For him, political pressure. There's another angle to this too, and I think if you look at the experience that Trump had with John Bolton, which I don't think people really look at. Anyway, I look at it differently than the way most people do, and I think I'm looking at it in a strictly materialist way, which is that what Trump did, in essence, was give Bolton enough rope to hang himself to show what an asshole he is. With that whole charade with Juan Guaido and all of that, I don't think Bolton has any comeback from that. And I think that the same goes for the idea that goes back to Bakke and other cases here in the United States of and which is a significant, to the extent this group exists, and it does, they're probably 100% Trump supporters, white people who think that they are oppressed by black and brown people in the post-civil rights era. I think that the colonial farmers' plight is akin to that, is a symbol of that to those voters. And I think by introducing it into a conversation with South Africa, that ultimately the only solution to that argument, public argument, could be reality, which is the reality is these people came here and murdered us, and that was their uncles or great grandfathers or whatever, and left us with nothing. We're taking our shit back, and if they don't like it, they can get the fuck out of here. I think that it's part of that argument. Whether Trump intends it that way or not, by the way, is separate from what I'm saying. But I think it brings this whole reaction in white people, Europeans in general, and particularly in the United States, to decolonization and to the civil rights movement and other things, that suddenly those who had privilege before are now the oppressed class. That by having a public example of something as ridiculous as this, and then there should be a public conversation that goes, there is a public conversation now started, that you can vet this whole issue if I think it provides an opportunity to do that. That's all I'm saying. And I have no idea. I don't give a fuck. I'm not saying he has any intent to do that at all. I'm just saying that, by the way, this.
Yeah, but no, I mean, you do bring up an interesting point, and to vulgarize your point, I mean, you don't preclude the possibility that Trump might be looking for a way, given all these forces arrayed against him, to you mentioned like hanging in there until an opportunity presents itself, or just trying to figure out how to navigate the material reality in a way that doesn't end in a huge a war. And so that's definitely one perspective.
More
another one is that he's on board and he's just sequencing things, and that's what he's up to. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Don. Like, if to vulgarize your point, I would say I don't rule that out as a possibility either. But I would say that if Trump becomes too intransigent and he doesn't do what's expected, like
he's done.
Stuff could happen to him.
He can't hold himself. See, this is the thing. The big fright that's induced in the population here is that Trump is the guy that's going to be able to bring us to like Nazi Germany culturally or whatever, or back to Jim Crow and as if we had to travel back.
Camps for the colored people.
That this culture has not changed sufficiently to be insulated against that, and that he's this threat. And as a matter of fact, the more he adheres to this argument, to that position publicly, the more fucking ridiculous he's going to look to larger and larger audiences. So I don't think that I see why people would A, play it up for political advantage, and B, why people would honestly say that's fucking disgusting. What are you, out of your mind? But I think also that the actual danger of that igniting like some dawn of a second white supremacy movement in the United States or whatever is nil. Zero.
Yeah.
There's no constituency for it.
And that seems to be a partisan Democratic attack, that line of thinking, and because it's safe for them, because they don't have to deal with reality. They don't have to deal with real issues.
And because if that were real, by the way, they wouldn't be a defense against it. Let's remember who the fucking Dixiecrats were.
Oh, that's true.
They were the fucking agent of fucking white supremacy.
Yeah. Well, I was interested to reference to Canada. If you ever get to watch the throne speech when you get off this, you'll see King Charles first meets a group of indigenous people singing and chanting a song to him, playing drums, which is quite impressive.
Huh.
And in the gallery, there are many native headdresses, many people, and they were referenced many times, indigenous people, and the attempts at national reconciliation between the white settlers who occupy the country and the native groups which have been oppressed here. Not quite the same as the United States, but still. But that contradiction, it also exists because nothing's being done to help the native people here. They live, most of them, like in very poor reserves. There are some who have quite a lot of money now because of some mineral deals they've made with the government lately. Haida Gwaii just had a treaty signed with the Ottawa government in which they were confirmed to control several 100,000 square miles. Yeah, but 100,000 square miles, BC coastline, which is worth trillions of dollars. So they're quite wealthy. But most bands are spread across the country and live in very poor conditions. No running water, no nothing, no medical care. It's just terrible. And yet they have this. So there's a lot of racism against natives here, which is quite open sometimes. So, like the United States, we don't have the same issue with slavery history that you had, but we had the opposite because slaves came up here to escape.
That's right. That's right. That was the haven.
I guess what I'm saying is the contradictions in every society. But I was thinking while you were talking, it seems to me that maybe I answer my own question: why Canada insists on continuing the hostile policy towards China and Russia and so on, Venezuela, Iran, when it doesn't serve Canadian interests whatsoever, except they still are under instructions from what you call the deep state, but the democratic deep state. And they're hoping that Trump's just a temporary phenomenon and it's going to disappear, or they're going to weather him through for the next 36 months. And then everything's going back to what they really want to do. Yeah. Or maybe the Europeans, I don't know if there's an underground conversation going on between those that want the war going and Trump, if he really wants peace, something else is going on. So
there's something to parse also between the difference between the United States, like as an entity, and with the national foreign policy and all of that, and the elite that runs the government of the United States. It uses that as one of its many instrumentalities. And so when you have an elite that dominated the presidency and the Congress, for example, and let's say, for argument's sake, that Trump was not wanted by them and got in despite what they wanted, that they still have the levers of control over Europe, Canada, and every place else. And so as they paint Trump and the idea of peace with Russia, for example, or whatever, as an outlier, that they confirm this up by having the rest of the world treat him as an outlier. What makes me think of that is that the United States, what's in the interest of the United States isn't necessarily the foreign policy of the United States either. In the same way that not getting involved in a war with Russia is not in the interest of Canada or the European countries, it's also not in the interest of the people of the United States. So their policy, and it appears, by the way, we're seeing a break on this, that if Trump isn't just full of shit, and if Trump isn't crazy thinking he can actualize this, if Trump decides to change the relationship with Russia, we may see Europe and not change it, like, in other words, as a third player in that, and showing some independence of the U.S. government, not of the elite, but of the government. And then Canada's in an interesting position there. And I have no idea where King Charles falls, in that either. If you have an elite mandating policy in the United States that Trump isn't part of, and then another one that has some levers of power here, which one has the British government in its, in its reach, if either.
Yeah.
No, that's a great point, Don. It's like, this liberal conception of a national interest is really deceiving and deceptive. It's obfuscatory. So, there's two classes, and what's in the interest of the working class majority is often the opposite of what is in the interest of the ownership class, the ruling class. And so there's not a single national interest. That whole concept doesn't really make any sense. So again, the majority interest of all the people, like, do we want to go to war with Russia? No. Do we want to give weapons to Russia? No. But and then within the elites, like they fight amongst themselves to determine a national interest, and there often isn't a consensus. And so there's a struggle to see, whose conception of what is in the best interest wins out. And so you see this internecine warfare that's been going on, against Trump, right? I mean, the whole Russiagate hoax had to have been an effort by, the majority of the ruling class to at least weaken, if not, marginalize this other minority faction that backed Trump and has kind of different ideas about what needs to happen. What is the national interest? And so, and all we can do is speculate, which is what we've been doing all program about, who are these factions? What is the differences between them? What do they agree on? What do they disagree on? What are they really hoping to accomplish? What do they think they can accomplish? All these things are, I think we're going to have a much better idea, maybe in a year, maybe less, maybe a little bit more. But I cannot see Trump's term ending and major questions will not be answered.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of people on the left attacking, also on the right attacking the new Prime Minister of Canada, Carney, as a Goldman Sachs agent and so on. So, well, I guess maybe he is, but they don't seem to understand. It's true. I mean, we're not expecting anything. He's a bourgeois. He represents the bourgeois class. We're not expecting miracles from this man. Nevertheless, he did block something even worse for most people here, going even further right. But I think they don't understand that the Canadian bourgeoisie, which was controlled by London, capital from London, up until the end of the Second World War, when Britain became bankrupt, essentially. And then the capital of New York, Chicago, Boston took over the influence, and Texas in the Western Canada, Houston. Their influence became big. Nevertheless, the Canadian bourgeoisie has its own interest. It has to protect its own wealth here. There are when I was in law school, we learned there are like 70 families that run this country.
Wow.
And they have vast wealth here, and they're not going to give that up to the Americans. They're not. That's not going to happen. Trump's dreaming. I mean, even in a transaction, they're not going to sell out. They're quite happy the way things are. They don't want to change that. But you're right. So the Western capitalist class is now fighting amongst themselves because of the failure of their war against Russia and China. They don't have the resources in Europe to continue growing their economy. The United States seems to be suffering from deindustrialization, and doesn't know what to do about it. And you got a lot of catfighting going on amongst these allies. So, and I think it's a very dangerous soup that's being boiled here. It could blow up and boil in our faces. I just don't. I'm not happy. I mean, I'm glad that there's a split in NATO and all this. It indicates that these things can change quite rapidly, but the consequences could be bad.
Yes, I agree with you. I'm slave to the clock. I got to split, and I will leave you with. Now that I'm free to say it, I'm scared that we're fucked. I hope we're not, and I think the task in front of us is to try to figure out how to avoid that outcome.
That's good.
I
enjoyed the discussion, Don. Thank you so much. I will wrap it up here, but I really appreciate you guys joining me.
Yeah, me too.
We will
Chris,
reconvene on Friday, and Thank you.
I'm
too,
glad you
very,
got
very
Don
much.
on because he's one of the great American journalists.
And the
So
same,
I'm glad you.
I enjoy speaking with you a lot, and I know you have all this wisdom about all this stuff. It's an honor really for me to be even on the same stage. So, thanks,
I'm
guys.
glad
Billy,
too.
thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll
You're
do
doing
it again
great work.
soon. See you
All
guys
right.
later. Bye.
All right, take care, guys. Bye bye.